Hello, welcome to the session on Principles of Language Teaching. Language. The most common definition of language that exists is that it is a system of arbitrary, conventionalized, vocal, written or gestural symbols that enable members of a given community to communicate intelligibly with one another. This definition and several others have helped us identify the chief features of language. Language is a means of communication. Language is a social phenomenon. Language is unique, creative, complex and modifiable. Language is arbitrary. Language is systematic. Language is symbolic. Language is human. Language is acquired by all in similar ways. Language is both linguistic and communicative competence. Teaching and learning language. As in the case of any subject, the teaching and learning of language is based on a few theoretical assumptions. The major one among them are: language is vital for social living. All language learning programs should cater not only to individual needs, but also to the requirements of the community and society. Language learning is a never-ending process, and the users of the language should develop the skills they will require to partake self-assuredly in the various activities within the community. A proper understanding of the different functions, context and varieties of language and the skills for using language for different purposes, audiences and situations have to be developed. Proficiency in information and communication technologies also need to be taken into consideration. Language learning is vibrant and progressive. Language development happens in a coiled fashion, so much so that it has been called spiral development. This involves further working on prior learning and using and responding to specific functions of language at increasingly complex and sophisticated levels. It should also be remembered that language itself varies and changes according to time, place and purpose. Critical thinking fosters language development. The ability to differentiate and respond critically has been known to foster language development. Language programs are often found to include activities and tasks that promote critical thinking, which would in turn positively contribute to the inculcation of language skills of the highest order. Language programs should focus on the learner. Language programs should focus on the learner and take into consideration the needs and requirements of the learner. Methodologies need to move away from placing the teacher at the center of the learning process and instead bring the learner to the forefront. Creativity and experimentation furthers language development. Students should be prompted to try out new things and to be highly creative while dealing with language. Trial and error and approximations in written and spoken language should be made an integral part of the learning process, which will in turn have a positive impact on the development of the student's knowledge and skills. Language expresses a person's individuality. There is a close association between the capability to control the different functions of language and learners' own personal, social, intellectual and imaginative development. The learner's attitudes, beliefs and outlooks are to a large extent decided by their language development. Active student participation is imperative in language learning. Students need to understand and manage the learning processes if language learning has to take place properly. They should also be accountable, which means that they take responsibility for their own learning, work on their own and reassign their skills and knowledge to new and demanding life situations. Language is best developed through actual use. It has been proven beyond doubt that students learn best when they are kept busy with focused tasks and are provided an assortment of fulfilling experiences. The focal point of the language programs should be language in actual use within genuine situations which are pertinent to the learner and which incorporate the learner's own experiences. Linguistic principles of teaching language. Sound linguistic principles form the basis of any language teaching. The major linguistic principles that need to be kept in mind are: importance to sounds of the language. The sounds of the language should be given priority. Sounds should be given their due place in the scheme of teaching and should not be presented in isolation. They should appear as part of actual language expressions and sentences spoken with the intonation and rhythm which would be used by a native speaker. Focus on basic sentence patterns. The students need to be presented with basic sentences used in actual conversations. Over a period of time, they could move on from smaller sentences to lengthier ones. It should be noted that while learning the mother tongue, they might be able to remember much longer sentences than they are able to remember in a different language, say a second language or a foreign language. Habit formation. Language is said to be properly developed when it becomes a habit. It is not enough that an individual knows the rules of the language, rather an ability to use these rules as a habit is more important. Habitual use of the language is not something that can be achieved overnight. It has to be developed gradually and through rigorous and extensive use of language patterns. It doesn't make any sense that the students merely learn new words and grammatical rules. The actual utility of language is when they learn to use them in real life situations. Simulation. Simulation is a term that means imitation. Good language is always inculcated by following excellent models of the language, preferably from native speakers. The learners of a language master the fine nuances of the language through rigorous imitation of these fine models, both in speech and writing. Controlled vocabulary. It simply doesn't make sense that the students are flooded with tons of new vocabulary items. The focus should be on the quality of the vocabulary that is being taught and not on the quantity. Real vocabulary that holds significance to the user from the point of view of actual use should be stressed on. Pattern practice. Pattern practice is a basic element in any language learning. Much of the success of any language program depends on the kind of patterns being used and the manner in which they are taught. The language instructor has to see to it that new patterns are continuously added to already taught ones and that the patterns are graded in the right order. Selection and gradation. It goes without saying that the grammatical items and vocabulary and structures of a language have to be properly selected and graded before they are taught. The criteria that needs to be taken into consideration for the selection of patterns are: A. Frequency, how frequently a certain item or words is used. B. Range, in what different contexts a word or an item can be used. C. Coverage, how many different meaning a word or an item can convey. D. Availability, how far an item is convenient to teach. E. Learnability, how far an item is easy to learn. And F. Teachability, how far an item is easy to teach in the social context. Gradation of the language material refers to the arranging the selected language items in an order. This process involves both grouping and sequencing. Grouping concerns 1. The system of language and 2. Its structures. The different types of grouping are: 1. Phonetic grouping refers to grouping according to sounds, that is, words having the same sound, hot, pot, rot, bot, shot, etc. are placed in a group. 2. Lexical grouping refers to grouping according to lexical context. Doctor, nurse, medicines, casualty, trauma are all words that can be grouped under the lexical context hospital. 3. Grammatical grouping refers to grouping according to similar patterns, my pen, her pen, pattern grouping, or according to phrase, on the table, on the chair, on the mat, on the paper, phrase grouping. 4. Semantic grouping refers to grouping according to meaning, alarm, fright, fear, shock, terror. 5. Structure grouping refers to grouping in the structures. It demonstrates how the selected items fit in the sounds into the words into phrases, the phrases into the clauses and the sentences into the context. Sequence. Sequence refers to the order in which items appear or which item follows which. Sequence needs to be rigorously followed in the arrangement of sounds, phonetic sequence, phrases, grammatical sequence, words, lexical sequence, and in meaning, semantic sequence. The oral approach. Predominance needs to be given to the speaking skill in the learning of any language. Experts have often opined that Once a person has mastered the spoken skills in a language, it becomes easier for him to learn the other skills. Over the years, many language teaching programs have hence shifted their focus from other language skills to the spoken skill. The 4 language skills. The 4 language skills hold prime significance in the learning of a new language. Listening, speaking, reading and writing, LSRW, are the 4 language skills that are stressed on, and it should be noted that each one of the 4 has to be developed in collaboration with the other 3. Of the 4 skills, listening and reading are called receptive skills or passive skills, while speaking and writing are called productive skills or active skills. Multi-pronged approach. The language teacher simply cannot remain content with adopting any one particular methodology or a strategy in teaching language. The approach has to be multi-pronged, which means that diverse and varied strategies have to be attempted simultaneously to teach language. When it comes to methodologies, it has even been suggested that the eclectic approach that puts in the very best of different methodologies should best be adopted. This multi-pronged approach to teaching language ensures that the students are not restricted to the benefits of any one particular strategy or plan. Habit through rigorous language use. Language can never be properly inculcated unless the students are provided numerous opportunities to actually use them in real contexts and situations. The more a student uses the language, the more will be his ability to utilize what he has learned in fresh contexts. This must go on until language use becomes a habit to the individual. Spiral approach. The spiral approach is a technique often used in teaching or textbooks where first the basic facts of a subject are learned without worrying about details. Later on, additional details are regularly added up to the existing knowledge base, with each encounter increasing in complexity and reinforcing previous learning. Sparse use of the mother tongue. It is always an easier way out for the teacher to use the mother tongue while teaching a new language, but frequent word-by-word translations often hamper the learning of a new language. Judicious use of the mother tongue is what should be attempted, and it should be rarely used except on very needful situations. Teachers should intend to provide students with excellent models of the target language instead of resorting to switching over to the mother tongue frequently. Psychological principles of teaching language. It goes without saying that various psychological principles have laid the foundation of language teaching, and let us take a quick look at some of the most pertinent ones. Motivation. Motivation is a theoretical construct used to explain behavior. It gives the reason for people's actions, desires, and needs. Motivation can also be defined as one's direction to behavior, or what causes a person to want to repeat a behavior and vice versa. The success of any action usually depends on the extent to which individuals strive to attain their purpose, along with their desire to do so. Motivation has been undeniably found to have an impact on the learning process, and the same applies to the language learning as well. It should be remembered that here is much more to motivational strategies than offering rewards and punishments. Generating student motivation is not enough in itself, also has to be maintained and protected. It is the quality, not the quantity, of the motivational strategies that we use that counts. There are 2 kinds of motivation that needs to be considered. Intrinsic motivation that concerns itself with internal rewards, self-satisfaction, and extrinsic motivation that concerns itself with external rewards, a cash prize. Interest. The maintenance of interest is a prime concern in language teaching, and a variety of activities need to be provided to keep them actively engaged in the learning process. Different kinds of teaching aids could also be made use of to retain student interest. Individual differences. Language teaching needs to understand that each learner in the class is distinctly different from another, and that each learner progresses ahead in learning at his own pace. Language learning occurs at different speed levels, and each learner learns to the optimum level only when he is allowed sufficient time to learn. Error correction. A lot depends on the correction of mistakes committed by the language learners. Without doubt, Frequent and prompt correction improves language learning significantly, and it should be noted that correction should not be delayed. In fact, a delayed correction is as useless as an uncorrected piece. Correction should also be non-obtrusive as far as possible. Reinforcement. Reinforcement is that which strengthens or weakens a particular behavior, and it goes without saying that it has a prime role in language development. There are 4 types of reinforcement: positive, negative, punishment and extension. Positive reinforcement increases the chance of a behavior recurring, a word of appreciation or a prize. Negative reinforcement removes something unpleasant so that the behavior may recur, does a task to stop nagging. Punishment reduces the chance of a negative behavior from recurring, receiving a smack for being disrespectful. And extension, refusing to buy a candy even when the child is screaming until the behavior stops. Regular review. Frequent and regular review is very important in language teaching. This holds special significance since the reviewing process is imperative in retention of the learned material. Care should be taken that during the process of reviewing, fresh and diverse material should be presented before the students for further practice. Right responses. It is an important psychological principle that classroom activities should strengthen the language skills. The techniques used by the teacher of English should encourage the maximum rate of correct responses. This will give children the feeling of success, achievement, and assured progress. Practice in real-life context. A language is best learned when its need is felt in everyday situations. So, English should be practiced in everyday situations with which children can easily identify. Now, let us summarize the session, and in the case of any subject, the teaching and learning of language is based on a few theoretical assumptions. Language is vibrant and progressive and vital for social living. Language programs should essentially focus on the learners and help them express their individuality. Critical thinking, creativity, and experimentation foster language development. Linguistic and psychological principles underlie the process of language development. While psychological principles as motivation, interest, individual differences, reinforcement play a major role, there are also linguistic principles as pattern practice, simulation, sequencing, and the selection and gradation of language structures. Before we move to the next session, please try to answer the following questions. 1. Write a note on the linguistic principles of language teaching. 2. What are the major psychological principles that underlie language teaching? 3. List the major factors to be kept in mind while drawing up a strategy for language teaching. Books for your reference are Teach English, a training course for teachers, Adrian Doff, Cambridge University Press, New York, 1988. Language and Teaching in the Elementary School, Dorothy G. Patterson and Velna D. Hayden, Appleton Century Crafts, New York, 1961. Spoken and Written Language, N.A.K. Halliday, Oxford University Press, London, 1989. Principles of Teaching Language, S. Venkateswaran, Vikas Publishing House Limited, New Delhi, 1989. Thank you for watching this session. See you in the next session. Until then, bye.